Biblical scholars have argued for years about the location of these holy sites. Now, one man says he might have found them.
The real location of Mount Sinai is not in Egypt, but Saudi Arabia.
For decades, a single mountain in Saudi Arabia remained off-limits, sealed behind armed guards, wrapped in barbed wire, and buried in silence. Officials labelled it a restricted military zone, quietly removing it from scientific interest and public discussion. But the question never went away. What were they hiding? In 2025, that silence finally broke. For the first time, a drone was granted limited access to fly over the site, equipped with advanced scanning technology capable of seeing beneath solid rock. What it revealed shocked researchers. Beneath the mountain were perfectly rectangular chambers, precise geometric grids, underground rooms laid out with deliberate order, structures no known natural process could explain. And the location makes the discovery even more unsettling. This mountain aligns with ancient descriptions of the place where Moses is said to have stood before God, where the 10 Commandments were received.
For centuries, the belief was that Mount Sinai, the place where God gave Moses the 10 Commandments,
a site tied to the very foundations of Western civilization. If this data is authentic, then this discovery is more than archaeology. It could be the first tangible evidence that the Exodus wasn't just a story, but a real event in human history. And this is the story they never wanted you to hear. The story of the wrong mountain. This may be the greatest misdirection in religious history. For more than 1,500 years, millions of pilgrims have journeyed to a mountain in Egypt known as Jebel Musa. At its base stands the famous St. Catherine's Monastery, built in the 6th century by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian. Every day, visitors climb its ancient steps, believing they are walking where Moses once stood. Churches teach it, textbooks reinforce it. The location has become so widely accepted that questioning it feels almost taboo. But there's a problem no one likes to address. The evidence doesn't line up, not even remotely. The Bible describes Mount Sinai as a mountain of fire and smoke. When God descended upon it, the mountain burned. The ground shook violently. Smoke rose like a furnace, and the entire peak was consumed by what can only be described as overwhelming volcanic force. Now compare that to Jebel Musa. It is made of granite, hard, stable, geologically inactive granite. Geologists have studied it extensively. There is no sign of volcanic activity, no burned rock, no heat damage, nothing that could explain the dramatic events described in the book of Exodus. Then there's the geography problem. According to the biblical account, the Israelites crossed the Red Sea and then traveled through a region called Midian before reaching the mountain of God. And here's the part scholars have known for centuries but often overlook. Midian was not in Egypt. Midian lay east of the Gulf of Aqaba, in what is now northwestern Saudi Arabia. In other words, the Israelites were heading toward Midian, modern-day Arabia, modern-day Saudi Arabia, not the Sinai Peninsula. So if Midian was in Arabia and Mount Sinai was in Midian, then the traditional location doesn't just seem questionable, it appears to be wrong. The route described in Exodus doesn't lead deeper into the Sinai Peninsula. It leads away from it, straight toward the Arabian desert. So how did the world spend 1,500 years focused on the wrong mountain? The answer comes down to politics, power, and one extremely influential monastery. In the 4th century, Christianity had just been legalized in the Roman Empire. Pilgrimage exploded. Believers wanted to see the places mentioned in Scripture with their own eyes. They wanted physical proof, and the church needed to provide it. So when a small group of monks settled at the base of a mountain in Egypt and declared it to be Mount Sinai, no one challenged the claim. Soon after, Emperor Justinian ordered the construction of a massive fortress monastery there, cementing the location as official. From that moment on, the site gained wealth, authority, and political protection. Questioning it meant questioning 15 centuries of tradition, millions of devoted pilgrims, and one of the oldest Christian institutions in the world. Scholars built entire theories around the assumption that Jebel Musa was correct. Geography was reshaped to fit the belief. Contradictions were brushed aside. Other possibilities were ignored. No one looked elsewhere until a drone finally flew over Saudi Arabia and captured what many now call the forbidden scan. In the northwestern region of Saudi Arabia stands a mountain known as Jabal al-Lawz. For decades, a small group of researchers argued that this was the true Mount Sinai. The route matched the biblical account. The geography made sense. Local Bedouin tribes had referred to it as the Mountain of Moses for generations. But there was one problem. No one could prove it, because Saudi Arabia wouldn't allow access. The entire region was classified as restricted. Military installations were scattered across the landscape. Armed patrols guarded every approach. Archaeologists who applied for access were repeatedly denied. Film crews were stopped at checkpoints and turned back. The only clues that ever slipped out came from a handful of adventurers who entered illegally, snapping blurry photos and smuggling them out before being arrested or expelled. For decades, the mystery of Jabal al-Lawz remained sealed behind barbed wire and layers of bureaucracy. Then, technology changed everything. In 2025, a private research team reached an agreement with Saudi officials. There would be no ground access, no digging, no excavation, just a single drone. It carried the same type of equipment military forces use to locate underground bunkers and hidden weapons caches. This wasn't an ordinary camera. It was a phased array, ground-penetrating radar system, technology powerful enough to see through more than 100 feet of solid rock and generate detailed three-dimensional images of whatever lay beneath the surface. The team programmed the flight path over Jabal al-Lawz, launched the drone, and waited. When the data began to appear on their screens, the lab fell silent. The radar didn't reveal natural caves or random geological fractures. It detected structures, clearly artificial. Rectangular chambers laid out in precise grid patterns beneath the mountain. Walls meeting at perfect 90-degree angles. Corridors connecting rooms in designs that looked intentional, calculated, architectural. Nature doesn't create right angles. Erosion produces curves. Tectonic forces create chaos. But what the scans revealed was order, the kind of order that only comes from intelligent design, human construction, or something even harder to explain. Depth readings showed the chambers sitting about 40 feet below the current surface, buried by thousands of years of landslides, erosion, and drifting desert sand. Sealed, intact, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be discovered. But the real shock wasn't just their existence, it was their size. This wasn't a small shelter or a single underground room. The radar revealed an entire network of chambers stretching more than 300 feet across. If this complex were laid out above ground, it would cover an area roughly the size of a football field, large enough to hold thousands of people, large enough to match the biblical account of 600,000 men, along with women and children, gathered at the base of the mountain of God. The research team ran the scans again and again. They checked for interference, recalibrated every sensor. Each time, the results came back the same. Something enormous is buried beneath that mountain, and it has been there since the time of Moses. Stone doesn't lie, and the underground chambers were only the beginning. Once the radar data became public, researchers began revisiting older reports from explorers who had managed to reach Jabal al-Lawz before access was restricted. What they recorded matches the biblical description with unsettling accuracy. Start at the summit. The rock at the peak of Jabal al-Lawz is black, not darkened by age, not stained by lichen or mineral deposits, but scorched, blackened as if the stone itself had been exposed to extreme heat. Every surrounding mountain is made of normal desert granite, light tan and grey, unchanged. But this peak looks as though it was placed inside a furnace. Geologists who analysed samples found clear signs of thermal metamorphism. The rock had been altered by temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. That's hotter than flowing lava. That kind of heat doesn't come from sunlight or erosion. It comes from catastrophic fire or a sudden, violent event on an unimaginable scale. Exodus chapter 19 describes this scene in striking detail. The mountain burned. Smoke rose like the smoke from a furnace. The entire mountain trembled violently. The blackened summit of Jabal al-Lawz matches that description almost perfectly. Now move down to the base of the mountain. There, explorers discovered a massive boulder split cleanly in two. The fracture is smooth, almost surgical. The two halves stand apart, separated by a wide channel. Surrounding the rock are deep erosion patterns caused by flowing water in one of the driest regions on Earth. The Bible describes Moses striking a rock and water pouring out in quantities large enough to sustain millions of people and their livestock. The split boulder at Jabal al-Lawz fits that account with unsettling precision. There is no natural water source nearby today, yet the erosion tells a different story, one of a sudden powerful flow that happened once, dramatically, and then stopped. Nearby, at the foot of the mountain, researchers found a large stone platform. This was not a natural formation. The stones were cut and intentionally stacked. Its dimensions closely matched descriptions of altars used in ancient Israelite worship. Scattered around the platform were burned animal bones. Chemical analysis dated some of them to the late Bronze Age, the same period traditionally associated with the Exodus. Exodus chapter 24 records Moses building an altar at the base of the mountain and offering sacrifices there. The platform at Jabal al-Lawz sits in the right place, from the right time, with evidence of exactly the right activity. But perhaps the most controversial discovery of all was found carved into nearby rocks. Petroglyphs, images of cattle, bulls with curved horns. In several carvings, human figures appear bowed before these animals, a detail that echoes one of the most infamous moments in the Exodus story. This aligns perfectly with the story of the golden calf. While Moses was on the mountain receiving the commandments, the Israelites grew restless. They melted down their gold jewelry and shaped it into an idol to worship. When Moses came down and saw what they had done, he destroyed it. But the event itself was never forgotten. The rock carvings at Jabal al-Lawz suggest that memory was literally etched into stone by people who may have witnessed it firsthand. Then there are the boundary markers. In Exodus chapter 19, the people are warned not to touch the mountain, or they will die. Moses sets clear boundaries to keep them at a distance. At Jabal al-Lawz, long lines of stones circle the base of the peak. These aren't walls. They aren't animal pens. They are single-file rows of stones forming a clear perimeter, a line meant not to be crossed. When you step back and look at the evidence, the pattern becomes hard to ignore. The scorched summit, the split rock, the altar with burned offerings, the boundary stones, the golden calf petroglyphs. Every piece of surface evidence points to this location, and now radar has revealed what lies beneath. Which brings us to the silence of the skeptics. For decades, critics have asked the same question to dismiss the Exodus account. Where is the evidence? If millions of people camped at Mount Sinai for nearly a year, where are the remains? The pottery, the tools, the fire pits, the waste sites. They argue that the absence of material evidence proves the Exodus never happened. But archaeologists who study nomadic cultures tell a very different story. The Israelites weren't building permanent cities. They lived in tents. And tents don't leave foundations. They leave small post holes, marks that erode, disappear, and vanish within a few decades. The Israelites lived on manna and unleavened bread. They weren't producing pottery on an industrial scale. The few clay vessels they carried would have broken over time and scattered across miles of desert. Over more than 3,000 years, those fragments would mix with pottery left behind by countless other nomadic groups moving through the same routes, making them impossible to identify or separate. Fire pits decay. Ash is carried away by the wind. Stones shift and scatter. After 3 millennia, even changes in soil color fade into nothing. In a desert environment, organic material disappears completely. Human waste, food scraps, fabric, leather, all of it breaks down and vanishes. Expecting to find clear surface evidence of a temporary encampment from 3,000 years ago simply isn't realistic from a scientific standpoint. But this is where the radar changes everything. The evidence isn't missing, it's buried. The chambers detected beneath Jabal al-Lawz could have served as storage areas. They may have been shelters later covered by landslides and flash floods. The Arabian desert is unforgiving. One powerful storm can bury structures within a single generation. If the Israelites built anything permanent at the base of the mountain, if they carved storage rooms into the rock or reinforced natural caves, those spaces would be underground by now, hidden, sealed, preserved by the dry desert air. And that's exactly what the radar shows. Rectangular rooms arranged in grid patterns. That isn't geology. That's architecture. That's deliberate construction by human hands. And their depth, about 40 feet below the surface, suggests these structures have been buried for thousands of years, waiting for technology advanced enough to reveal them. Skeptics often point to another argument: Egyptian records. If the Exodus really happened, why didn't Egypt write about it? It sounds convincing, until you understand how Egyptian history was recorded. Pharaohs documented victories. They celebrated triumphs. They did not carve humiliating defeats into stone. If a ruler lost his labor force, watched his land devastated by plagues, and saw his army drown in the sea, he would never preserve that story for future generations. And we know Egypt erased embarrassing history. When the Hyksos rulers were expelled, their names were literally chiseled off monuments. When Akhenaten tried to reform Egyptian religion, later pharaohs destroyed his statues and removed his name from temple walls. If Egypt was willing to erase its own kings, it would absolutely erase the story of a foreign god defeating them. So the silence of Egyptian records isn't evidence against the Exodus. It's exactly what we would expect if the Exodus really happened. Which brings us to the most controversial question of all. What lies inside those buried chambers? Some researchers believe they may hold more than pottery or tools. They believe something far more significant could be sealed beneath that mountain. The Ark of the Covenant. Follow the logic. The Ark was built at Mount Sinai. Exodus chapter 25 describes its construction in exact detail. A chest of acacia wood overlaid with pure gold, containing the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments. The Ark traveled with the Israelites for centuries. It was kept in the tabernacle, later placed inside Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. And then it vanished. By the time the Babylonians destroyed the temple in 586 BC, the Ark was already gone. There's no record of it being captured, no mention of it being destroyed. It simply vanishes from history. For nearly 2,000 years, people have searched for it. Some believe it's in Ethiopia, guarded inside a church. Others say it's hidden in Egypt, buried in a secret tomb, or sealed beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. But there's another possibility, one most people never consider. What if it never left the place where it was made? Imagine the situation. The kingdom of Israel was collapsing. The temple was under imminent threat. The priests had one priority: protect the most sacred object in their faith, the physical symbol of God's presence among his people. Where would they take it? Not to Egypt, their ancient enemy. Not to a city destined to fall to invaders. They would take it to the one place no enemy would dare violate: the mountain of God. Mount Sinai was sacred ground, remote, isolated, shielded by hundreds of miles of wilderness. If the priests sealed the ark inside a hidden chamber beneath that mountain, it would be safe, hidden, preserved, waiting for the right moment. The radar scans revealed sealed, rectangular chambers carved deep into the rock. If those chambers were built to protect something of immense value, then the Ark of the Covenant isn't impossible. It's remote. It's controversial. But it's a possibility that can't simply be dismissed. And even without the Ark, the implications are overwhelming. Someone devoted enormous time, labor, and resources to build underground rooms at the base of a scorched mountain in the heart of the Arabian desert. There is only one explanation that fits all the evidence, an explanation written thousands of years ago in the book of Exodus. This is the mountain where Moses received the law. This is where fire descended from heaven. This is where the covenant between God and humanity was sealed. A sacred memory, written not just in words, but in stone. Here's a detail most people completely overlook, and it changes how we understand this discovery. The Bible suggests that Mount Sinai was already holy before Moses ever set foot on it. Pause and think about that. In Exodus chapter 3, when Moses encounters the burning bush, God tells him to remove his sandals because the ground he's standing on is holy. Not that it will become holy, not that God is making it holy in that moment. The ground already is holy. That means its sanctity predates Moses. This one detail carries enormous implications. Moses didn't wander onto a random, unknown mountain in the wilderness. He was drawn to a place that already held spiritual meaning, a mountain long recognized as sacred. But sacred to whom? This is where the Midianites come into the story. Moses had been living among the Midianites for 40 years before the burning bush. He married a Midianite woman, Zipporah. Her father, Jethro, was a Midianite priest. For 4 decades, Moses was immersed in Midianite life, tending sheep in their land, learning their customs, and almost certainly absorbing their religious traditions. If the Midianites regarded a particular mountain as holy, Moses would have known it. He would have understood its significance. And when God called him to that mountain, he would have recognized exactly where he was being summoned. Archaeological surveys in the region surrounding Jabal al-Lawz strongly support this interpretation. Researchers have uncovered extensive Midianite settlements throughout the surrounding valleys. Distinctive Midianite pottery, decorated with geometric patterns and dating to the Late Bronze Age, has been found across the region. Archaeologists have also identified copper smelting sites where the Midianites processed ore from nearby mines. Even more telling, evidence of organized trade networks shows this region was connected to Egypt, the Levant, and the wider ancient world. The Midianites were not primitive nomads wandering aimlessly through the desert. They were a sophisticated society with defined territories, established religious practices, and cultural traditions passed down over generations. They knew their land intimately, every valley, every ridge, every mountain, and the ones that stood out would have carried meaning. Jabal al-Lawz stands out unmistakably. A blackened summit rising above surrounding peaks of tan and grey granite would have demanded an explanation. A massive split boulder bearing clear signs of water erosion in a region with almost no water would have sparked stories. Long before any Israelite ever arrived, the Midianites would have built traditions around these features. This means the mountain carried sacred significance before Moses. That sacred memory formed an unbroken thread linking the ancient past to the present, and that continuity is crucial. It helps explain why the true location was remembered locally, even while a false one was later established elsewhere. The people who lived near Jabal al-Lawz never forgot. Generation after generation, fathers told their sons, mothers told their daughters, elders taught the children. This was the mountain of Moses, the place where fire descended, the ground where God spoke. For the people who lived there, this was never abstract theology. It was local geography. It was part of everyday life. They walked past the mountain, they pointed to it. They passed its story down through thousands of years of unbroken oral tradition. Meanwhile, more than 1,500 miles away in Egypt, Byzantine monks were guessing. They had no connection to the original people, no access to living memory. What they had were texts, legends, and political pressure, but not the continuous thread linking them to the actual events. When they pointed to Jebel Musa and declared it Mount Sinai, they weren't preserving a tradition. They were creating one from scratch. They needed a sacred site, so they invented one. These monks were outsiders, assigning meaning to a landscape they did not truly understand. In contrast, the Bedouin tribes near Jabal al-Lawz were insiders, caretakers of a memory passed down through countless generations. For centuries, Western scholars dismissed those Bedouin traditions. They called them folklore, superstition, the fantasies of uneducated desert dwellers who supposedly couldn't know more than academics with university credentials. The arrogance was staggering. Scholars trusted a monastery built by outsiders over oral histories preserved by the very people who had lived on that land since the events themselves. Institutional authority was placed above indigenous knowledge. Written records created 1,500 years later were treated as more reliable than spoken memory maintained continuously from the beginning. And now, the radar is confirming what the locals have said all along. The Bedouin were right. The academics were wrong. The mountain is real. The chambers are real. And the sacred memory carried by generations of desert dwellers, ignored and dismissed for centuries, may be the most accurate record we have. Sometimes the people closest to the land know more than the experts in distant towers. Sometimes oral tradition carries more truth than academic consensus. And sometimes, after 3,000 years, memory finally gets its vindication. So here's where that leaves us. The data is in. The patterns are undeniable. And the mountain has finally broken its silence. Beneath Jabal al-Lawz lies something deliberate, sealed, preserved, and waiting, which forces us to confront a question far more unsettling than what's buried underground. What happens if we're right? Because the moment those chambers are opened, history doesn't just gain a footnote, it fractures. Beliefs shift, maps change, and stories long dismissed as legend demand to be reconsidered as memory. The radar has shown us the outline, not the answer. And maybe that's intentional. So the real question isn't whether we can dig, it's whether we're ready for what the truth might demand of us when we do.